Hi, I'm Rhonda. I'm an Al-Anon, and I wanted to thank Jim for inviting me to share at this conference today. It's great to see Peter again. I haven't seen Peter and Marion in a while, and Ian, your story was just unbelievable. Thank you for sharing that with us. I am a member of the Primary Purpose group, and it's an Al-Anon group, and we meet on Monday nights, and we've been meeting on Zoom for many years. So this is not anything new to us. We just celebrated our 9-year anniversary. I do want to take a moment to just pray myself as well to get centered. Dear God, please set aside everything we think we know about ourselves, the big book, alcoholism, Al-Anonism, the 12 steps, and especially you, so that we may have a truly open mind and a new experience. Please help us see the truth. Amen. And I always like to start out with a letter by Anne Smith, because Anne was one of my Al-Anon heroes. And I think it's important for us, especially in these times, to remember where we came from. It was a letter that was written from Henrietta Dotson, AA number 3's wife, to Bill Wilson about Anne Smith. On Friday, June 28th, 1935, I met Anne Smith. I met the most thoughtful, understanding person I had ever known. After talking with her a while, I addressed her as Mrs. Smith. She said, "It's Anne to you, dear." She wanted to take down all the barriers. Anne told me to surrender myself to God and ask him if he had a plan to me, to reveal it to me. Anne taught me to have quiet time in the morning, that I might feel closer to God and receive strength for the day. She taught me to surrender my husband to God, not to tell him how to stay sober, as I had tried that and failed. Anne taught me to love everyone. She said, "Ask yourself, what is wrong with me today if I don't love you?" She said, "The love of God is triangular. It must flow from God, through me, through you, and back to God." She taught me that I should never criticize the remarks of a person leaving the meeting, as we do not know God's plan. Maybe what that person said will meet the needs of someone in the group. In the early part of 1936, Anne organized a women's group for wives of alcoholics, whereby in her loving way, she tried to teach us patience, love, and unselfishness. Anne made it very plain to me in the beginning that she wanted no credit for herself. It was God. All she wanted was to keep herself so that she could know and follow God's plan. When I met and talked with this intelligent and deeply spiritual woman, I was completely sold on AA. And I just want to, I'm going to use a little bit of literature today in my share. I just wanted to share a couple more things so that we can understand the value of Anne Smith and the first Al-Anon women. I hope you can hear me over this rain. It's terrible.
I can hear you fine.
Good. Okay. Members saw that the difficulty in working with women was primarily because of sexual problems. It was considered safe. It was considered safer for non-alcoholic wives to work with the first alcoholic women. And then it goes on to say, Dr. Bob always agreed to talk to the few women who came his way. Then he usually turned them over to Anne and the other wives who were willing to work with them. So, I think it's a nice reminder that the first women of AA came from the first women of Al-Anon. And I hear a lot people ask me, what is Al-Anon? They don't even know what Al-Anon is. And Al-Anon is a fellowship comprised of the wives and families and friends of alcoholics. We love alcoholics. On page 122 in the big book, in the family afterwards, it says, a doctor said to us, years of living with an alcoholic is almost sure to make any wife or child neurotic. To the entire family is to some extent ill. And I looked up the word neurotic, and it said any toxic agent affecting the nervous system. And so I was raised by a woman who was raised by an alcoholic. And though my mother did not have the disease of alcoholism, she did have, sorry, I'm having problems with my computer. Though she did not have the disease of alcoholism, she had the personality of an alcoholic. She had an obsessive mind, and she had a spiritual sickness. And that's what I have. I have the 2 out of the 3 parts of alcoholism. In the doctor's opinion, on the bottom of page XXVIII or 28, it says that to them, their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. So because I was raised by a woman who was raised by an alcoholic, alcoholism, the behaviors of an alcoholic became very normal to her. You know, there was a story about a dog who was hit by a car, and after that, she always dragged her back legs. She could never walk right again. And eventually this dog had puppies, and the puppies were fine. And about 3 or 4 weeks later, they started dragging themselves and limping around. And they brought these puppies to the vet to have them x-rayed. And the vet said, there's nothing wrong with these puppies. They're fine. They learned this behavior from their mother, you know? And that's where I learned this Al-Anonic behavior was from my mother. We love alcoholics. You know, I met my husband, and we dated for about 1.5 years. And we went up to the Wilson House in East Dorset, Vermont. Took me up there, and I attended my first AA meeting. And he asked me to marry him that night up at East Dorset. And he explained to me that AA was a very big part of his life, and he wanted to marry me, and he wanted it to become a part of my life as well. And of course I said yes. And because I was a very sick Al-Anon. I had no recovery. I didn't even know what Al-Anon was myself at the time that I married him. But I was very obsessed with him. You know, my obsessive mind, I was obsessed with him. And up until that time, I had always been involved with 2 men. I had to have 2 men in case one left. I always had to have a backup, because see, that was my drug of choice. I tried drinking, and it didn't do for me what it did for the alcoholic. But when I connected with a man, it produced chemicals in my brain that I became addicted to. And so I always needed to get that fix. And I was afraid that if my man left, I was going to go without that fix. And so I always needed to have 2. But when I met my husband, I was so obsessed with my husband that that one was enough, because, especially because I was going to marry him. And so I think that was God's way too of protecting me, and so that later on down the road, I would be able to connect with God one-on-one, you know, because there will come a time. A month after I married my husband, my stepson called, and he wanted to move to Connecticut from Florida, because he was an alcoholic and he wanted to get sober, and he knew his father was going to be able to help him get sober. I wanted him to move up here for other reasons. I wanted him to move up here because I thought that I could cure him. I could love him enough, and I could give him enough discipline so that he could get sober, and I would do the impossible, because I had no idea, again, what alcoholism was or what Al-Anonism was. So JJ comes up here, and now my husband, remember, had told me that he wanted me to adapt his way of life, and he wanted AA to be a part of my life, and he was going to start taking me to all these conferences and stuff like that. Well, once JJ moved up here, I was kind of put on a shelf. And JJ attended all the conferences and I stayed home. And I always saw my husband put his big book under his arm, and JJ grabbed his book and they left for these meetings, and I stayed home alone. And this went on for about a year, and I became very, very lonely. And this did not meet any of my expectations as to what my marriage was going to be. So about a year into this, I finally found myself in the rooms of Al-Anon. I don't even know how I got there, but I just needed relief. I had heard that these rooms were for the wives of alcoholics, and so I went into the rooms, and I was trying to learn how to work these steps. And I'd ask these questions and nobody could give me any answers. So I started reading books, and I read this one book, Al-Anon Family Groups, and I have it here. And the fifth tradition, it says that each Al-Anon family group has but one purpose: to help the families of alcoholics. We do this by practicing the 12 steps ourselves. And then it goes on to say that we do this by studying the basic book of Alcoholics Anonymous. So it's telling me to read the book of Alcoholics Anonymous, but I don't want to read it because all I know is that my husband took it with him all the time and he left me behind. So I didn't want to read a book that was going to tell me more about that kind of behavior from my husband. And eventually I was asked to speak at an AA conference in Connecticut. And I was really excited because I was going to make a list of all of the things that upset me about my husband and JJ. And I spoke at that conference, and it ended up that I was reading my second column of my 4-column inventory. Didn't know that at the time. But there came a point where my husband was as frustrated in our marriage as I was, and we're like 3 years into our marriage, and I'm 3 years into Al-Anon, or 2 years into Al-Anon. And my husband comes home one day and he says, I need a break from this. He says, we need to take a 90-day break. And I didn't know what to do because, for the first time in my life, since I started dating, I was alone. And I didn't know how to be alone. I didn't have that backup because, remember, I was so obsessed with him. And so I wanted to die, but I didn't want to kill myself. I didn't have the courage to kill myself. So, my disease is really good at manipulating situations so that I look like the victim. And so I'm going to work every night, and I'm scoping out the restaurant, and I'm watching the people that drank the most. And at the end of my shift, I go to them and I start a conversation, and I encourage them to go out with me. We go out for drinks after my shift. But see, I asked them to drive because I want to die their victim of drunken driving. I want to die, and I want them to kill me. I don't want to take responsibility myself. And then eventually, that didn't happen, obviously. And eventually, I heard this other woman talk, and she had spoken a language I had never heard before. She had spoken about recovery, and she spoke about the 12 steps and how she worked the 12 steps. And I had never heard that before. And so I approached her and I asked her if she would sponsor me. And she said, I'll sponsor you. She said, but I'll do it the only way I know how, and that's through the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And at that time, I had the desperation, that others had talked about. I had the desperation of a drowning man, and I was willing to do anything, including the big book. And so, but I asked her name was Sue, and I asked Sue, how is that going to help me? How is this big book going to help me? It's for alcoholics. And then we started reading the foreword to the first edition. She said, let's just start reading it and see what we find in this book. And it says in the foreword to the first edition, we think this account of our experiences will help everyone to better understand the alcoholic. So who are they talking to? Because they're not talking to the alcoholic, they're talking about the alcoholic. So maybe they're talking to me. Many do not comprehend that the alcoholic is a very sick person. Again, they're talking about him, they're not talking to him. And besides, we are sure that our way of living has its advantages for all, period. It doesn't say all alcoholics. So I'm thinking, maybe this is for me, And then on page 18, we're reading along in the book, and on page 18, it's saying that alcoholism engulfs all whose lives touch the sufferers, And then it goes on to say, we hope this volume will inform and comfort those who are or may be affected. There are many. Again, who's affected by someone else's alcoholism? Me. So again, I'm seeing that this book is talking to me as much as it is to the alcoholic, And then on page 19, it says, this should suggest a useful program for anyone concerned with a drinking problem, not anyone that has a drinking problem. So again, I'm concerned with a drinking problem. It's not mine, So I'm reading these things and I'm seeing that they're talking to me as well. And then I want to show you how we read this book. I'm going to change just a couple words in this book. On page 24, the first full paragraph, it's in italics. It says, the fact is that most Al-Anonics, for reasons yet obscure, have lost the power of choice in thinking or obsessing or in eating. Our so-called willpower becomes practically non-existent. We are unable at certain times to bring into our consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation of even a week or a month ago. We're without defense against the first thought. That's hitting home for me. So now I'm starting to think that maybe this book will help me as well. And then we're reading in We Agnostics. We get up to We Agnostics, and I'm seeing myself, of course, in all the bedevilments. I'm certainly having trouble with personal relationships. My husband left. My daughter moved out. We couldn't control our emotional natures. We are prey to misery and depression. We couldn't make a living. We had a feeling of uselessness. We were full of fear. We were unhappy. We couldn't seem to be a real help to other people. Yeah, that's me, So I'm starting to see myself in this book, because up to page 23, we're learning about the physical allergy of alcoholism. And then from page 23 to 60 something, we start learning about the obsessive mind. And that's what I have. So we're reading on page 56, where it's reading about the guy who's in a bed. And it says, is it possible that all the religious people I have known are wrong? And that hit me like a ton of bricks. It's like, wow, I'm looking around and I'm looking at all the churches that are in my town. And it's like, are all these people wrong that are going to these churches and finding peace? And I'm right, thinking that I can control myself and my life and I can make all these decisions? And then it goes on to say, who are you to say there is no God? Again, hit me like a ton of bricks. And that's when I started to have a spiritual awakening. It came very early for me. And I really think that was part of God's plan, was that it would come early for me because he wanted me to do his work, And then we get to pages 60, 63, And I think that this is the best thing that I've seen in the book, because it's talking about my husband, you know, clearly it's talking about my husband. And I call up my sponsor and I'm saying that to Sue, you know, like, this is him. It fits him to a T. And she's like, very calmly, she just says, read it again, Rhonda. And like the 5th time I read it, I put my husband's name in the book because I didn't want to lose this page. And, you know, and finally, like the 15th time I read it, I needed to read it about 15 times. And I saw that it was me. And it was like, holy cow. It hit me again like a ton of bricks, you know? And so then we get to our 4th step. And Sue was a member of the Hyannis group. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Hyannis group, but it takes them about 1.5 to 2 years to write their 4th step. And it takes them another 6 months to a year to hear their 5th step. Now, I'm trying to actively die every night, and I don't have that kind of time to do these next 2 steps. And I said that to her. And she was an amazing sponsor. And she said to me, you know, I know of a guy down in Dallas, Texas named Cliff Bishop. And you should call Cliff, explain your situation, and he will help you to find someone that can bring you through the work quicker. She says, this is the only way I know how to do it, but Cliff can help you. So I called Cliff and I explained my story, and Cliff says, you know, Rhonda, if you're coming to me all the way from Hartford, Connecticut, he goes, I really think that God wants me to sponsor you. And I was desperate, you know, anything. I will do anything it takes, you know. And so Cliff and I did this work through the big book over the internet. And that's why, you know, I'm very comfortable sponsoring people today all over the country and Canada, you know, anywhere really, because it was done with me and I had an incredible experience. And, you know, we did our fourth step in our 5th step. And as part of the 5th step, you know, it says to take an hour to yourself afterwards. And thank God from the bottom of your heart that you get to know him better. And you know, that hit me again like a ton of bricks. I felt after I hung up, you know, got off with Cliff and I took that hour, I felt like my heart was wide opened and God was just flowing right into it. It was amazing to me, you know. I just lost my place. It's because I'm on the next page. That's why. And so, you know, and then I go through 6 and 7 and I'm looking at step 6 and I realize that God is not going to pry open my hands to take these character defects from me. And step 6 is a really important step to me because I realize that I have to be willing. And if I'm not willing, I have to pray for the willingness to become willing to open my hands and my heart and my mind and let God take them from me before I can take that 7th step. And so that's what I did, you know, and so I'm up to like my eighth step, and you know, my 8th and 9th step, and my 9th step, I went to my stepson JJ, and I needed to make amends to him first, you know, because JJ was an innocent victim to my Al-Anonism. You know, he asked to come to Connecticut to get sober, and he wanted his father to save his life, and apparently he trusted me enough, you know, to welcome him into my home, our home, like we did. And in return, I saw him as just this guy that was getting in my way of my husband. And I was mean to him, and I was abusive to him verbally. And I said a lot of rotten things to him. And I felt like it was important for me to make that amends to him first. I felt like he deserved that. You know, and then my husband and I, 90 days is going by, and I did not do this work to reconcile my marriage. I did this work because I never again wanted to live with the pain that I had been living with my entire life. You know, I was raised by a woman who was raised by an alcoholic, so I had this obsessive mind my whole life. Everything I did obsessively. And I never wanted to live like that again. And Sue told me that she knew of a different way. And so that's why I did this work. It was not to get back together with my husband, you know, because at the time, my husband and I had decided that we were going to get divorced. And he went to Dallas or to Austin, Texas to work with his sponsors and doing a 4th and 5th step with them. I had done my work with Cliff, and we really got back together to make amends to each other. And when we did that and we looked at our sound and sane ideals, we saw that they were similar, you know, and we saw that if we wanted to come back together, we had to come back together on a different plane, because the one that we were on wasn't working for us. So we came back together in a relationship where we put God first, our program second, and our relationship third. Because without God in a program, we have nothing to bring to a relationship with each other. And we both know that now, you know, and that's why we were able to reconcile. But it was not the intent when we got back together to make amends. So, you know, I'm doing my amends, and now, you know, I'm living in the principles of 10, 11, and 12. You know, I do 10 steps on a daily basis. You know, when I wake up in the morning, just like Peter was saying, before I get out of bed, I'm talking to God, you know, and as soon as I get out of bed, I have a journal, and I do two-way prayer. As soon as I start, and sometimes I have to have it by my bed, because God talks to me at the damnedest time. Sometimes he will talk to me at 3 o'clock in the morning, you know, and I will have to roll over and write down what God is telling me, because he has woken me up to talk to me. And he won't stop until I write it down, and then I can go back to sleep. So, you know, this two-way prayer I learned from Wally Payton in a book, How to Listen to God. And so I do my two-way prayer while I'm doing the rest of my prayers, and while I'm doing my my morning readings. And it takes me anywhere for probably about an hour. I sit with God between in bed and out of bed, in my sitting room, my prayer room, and my husband and I do some morning readings together and stuff. And that's how I start my day every single day, whether I'm on vacation, whether I'm in the hospital, no matter what, I connect with God on a daily basis. And I take God with me throughout my day, you know, and I talk to him throughout my day. Someone is unmuted.
So I mean, you know, it made us a rare book of business with us. Like
Thank you, Jim. And you know, I want to tell you about my story, how I really got into sponsorship. It was right after I was doing my 9th step, and Dane, my husband, took me to a conference in East Dorset, Vermont, because now he has seen error in his ways too, and now he is including me in this program. And he took me to a conference, and this woman at the conference said to me, "We need an Al-Anon to handle a phone call we just got, and you're the only Al-Anon here. Can you take this number and call this person?" And this person was from Oklahoma, and I had no idea what I was doing. And I tried to back out of it, and I said, "I really don't know what to do," and you know, this or that. And she said, "You know, God will pick up for you. Just go outside and make this phone call." So I went outside and I called this woman, and the situation that this woman was struggling with was something that I had done in my sickness, and probably a lot of other people had not done in theirs. And I knew exactly how to help her, you know, and God worked directly through me to be able to help her. And I think that happened on purpose, so that God could show me that he would help me and show me what to do if I just put forth the effort. You know, so that was proof that I could sponsor and that I needed to sponsor. Because when I went through this work, I wanted to just kind of slide under the radar. There was a lot of other sponsors out there who was going to miss me, right? But I learned that that my life depends on it, you know. And I'm gonna read to you now from one of the lost chapters, The Family Afterwards. I think this is the most valuable paragraph in the entire book. And I love this book. I read this book with every single person I sponsor, the first 164 pages. It says, this painful past may be of infinite, it's talking about the alcoholic's past. And it also is talking, as far as I'm concerned, about the Al-Anon's past as well. This painful past may be of infinite value to other families still struggling with their problem. We think each family which has been relieved owes something to those who have not. And when the occasion requires, each member of it should be only too willing to bring former mistakes, no matter how grievous, out of their hiding places. Showing others who suffer how we were given help is the very thing which makes life seem so worthwhile to us now. Cling to the thought that in God's hands, the dark past is the greatest possession you have, the key to life and happiness for others. With it, you can avert death and misery for them. So that's why I sponsor, because I have the ability, just like you guys as alcoholics have the ability to save people's lives. I save marriages, because in the rooms of Al-Anon, a lot of people don't understand what Al-Anon is. And they think it's about boundaries, and they think it's about ultimatums, and they break up their families because their alcoholic spouses don't have the ability. They make the promises with the best of intentions, but they don't have the ability to follow through with the promises that they make. And their spouses never understand why, and a lot of them leave. I have sponsored hundreds and hundreds of women, and I've only seen 2 of them leave their spouses. I've seen hundreds of women come to me and say, I want to leave. And I say, just wait until we go through this work. Give me a few weeks. We'll go through this work. And then if you want to leave on the other side of this work, then you'll know who you are, and you'll know what your husband's disease is. And then you can make these decisions with an open mind instead of out of resentment and ignorance to what alcoholism really is. And I haven't lost very many marriages since then. You know, I'm going to tell you a story now about a spiritual experience that I had. My husband spoke at this conference a few weeks ago, and he shared his version of it, and now you're going to hear my version of it. It was a very spiritual experience for both of us. We had just gotten back from about a 3,000-mile trip from Tennessee to Connecticut. And my God voice, because now that I've done this work, God talks very clearly to me, and I hear him and I listen to him. He's telling me to drink water right now. So I'm gonna. So we just got back from a 3,000-mile trip, and God is telling me, get help. You're going to need help. And I tried to call 911, and I couldn't dial the phone. I see the numbers and I know what I got to do, but I can't do it. And so I went to my tenant's apartment, and I asked him to call an ambulance for me. And he called the ambulance, and just as the ambulance was putting me into, loading me up, my husband's sponsee drives by, his best friend, and he says, Rhonda, what's going on and what do you need? And I said, I need Dane. I can't reach him, but I need him at the hospital. So we get to the hospital, and Pete goes to find my husband. And I get to the hospital, and within a couple of hours of being there, they checked me out and they said, there's nothing really going on, but we'll keep you for observation for a while. And within probably an hour or two, I have to go to the bathroom, and the nurses won't listen. And so I told my sister, help me get out of bed so I can go to the bathroom. And I went to move, and I was paralyzed. And I couldn't move anything on my left side at all. And so I started yelling for the doctors, and I said, I'm paralyzed, and if you don't do something, I'm going to die. And they came back in and they scanned me again. And they said, you're having a stroke. And so a couple hours go by, and they inject me with this stuff to break up the blood clots, and the blood clots aren't breaking up. And so eventually they bring me upstairs and they operate on my brain for 6.5 hours to remove the blood clot from my brain. But when they told me I was having a stroke, it was instant. I went into prayer, and it was not, God, please save my life, or please let me live. It was, God, just like the third step, I'm willing for you to take me if you're done with me here. I'm afraid for my daughter. I don't know if she'll be okay without me. And God said, your daughter will be fine. And I said, but if you want to keep me here, please give me enough faculties so that I can continue to carry your message. Because see, at the time I could no longer talk. I had lost the ability to talk. And so I was at perfect peace. I knew that I was with God, and I knew that either way I was going to be fine. And I knew that my loved ones were going to be fine. I knew that my husband had God in a program. God assured me my daughter was going to be okay, and that's really all I cared about, because I knew all my friends were program people, so they all have God, right? But God brought me through it. And when I woke up, and for the next about 40 hours, every 8 hours, I would throw another blood clot, and they would have to rush me back into the operating room, and they kept operating. And I woke up and I had all these gouges all over me from where they were chasing all these blood clots. And I was intubated for 5 days and I was conscious but intubated because they had to keep bringing me down for surgery. But in those 5 days, I felt completely safe and protected, like God was holding me in the palm of his hand. It was so incredibly peaceful. And it was probably the most peaceful 5 days of my husband's life while I was intubated as well. But, there was a lot of God at that time, a lot of God in the hospital, a lot of God surrounding the both of us and carrying us. And when I got out of the hospital and they transferred me to a rehab hospital, and I still wasn't talking very well, and God told me my girls felt that I needed a meeting, and so they brought my big book, and God told me to lead the meeting. And I said, I really can't talk very well, God. And God said, just lead the meeting. And I did. And as soon as I started reading from the big book, it was like I was speaking as fluently as I ever had. And that was, to me, that was just the power of God. And that's why I say that I believe that my life depends on the work that I do for God. I don't know if God would have had a reason for me to live if I wasn't working with the amount of people that I was working with and carrying the message that I carry. And so every day now that I wake up is a gift, because I hung in the balance for 5 days, and I could have gone either way. My husband, no one knew which way I was going to go. And every day that I wake up is a day that God gave me to do his work. And that's why this work is so important to me. And this program is so important to me, and it's something that we need to preserve, whether we're Al-Anons or alcoholics. We need to know where we came from, And we need to preserve it for the next generation, because there will be people in the next generation that are going to need it. We can't water it down. That's why I read the big book with every single person that I sponsor. Sometimes I read the same chapter 3 times in a day. But you know, that I think that we can't skimp on this, and we can't piecemeal it. It needs to be right out of the book, so that there's no question about it. If it's not in the book, I'm not going to say it. If it's not in the book, I'm not going to tell you to do it. I'm going to end now. I always start with Ann Smith, and I always end with Arbutus O'Neill. She was the first Al-Anon delegate of Texas, and she really tried to preserve our fellowship by keeping the big book in our rooms. And for a lot of crazy reasons, the big book was taken out of our rooms in the mid-70s. And when you take the big book out of a room, you know what happens. Recovery goes with it. And I believe that that's what's happening in our fellowship. And so I want to read Arbutus's words so that we can try and preserve it and know why. She says, I remind you that the principles of this program hold a message that the whole world needs to know. And I remind you that you are the only people in the world so uniquely qualified to carry this message. Let me remind you, there are many drunken men and women who will die if you fail to carry this message. There are kids out there afraid for their alcoholic mom or dad to come home tonight, who will develop warped personalities if we fail to carry this message. And there are men and women who won't have the courage to live one more day with an alcoholic, and they will break up their homes if we fail to carry this message. And if we fail to carry this message, may God have mercy on these people, and may God have mercy on us. Thank you.
Thanks, Rhonda.
Hey, Jim, can you hear me? Jack Devlin, alcoholic. Rhonda, love you more than many people in the world. Very grateful to be connected with you. One question for you. What does it look like working with a sponsee out of the big book? A lot of the people on here are alcoholics, and I know that you hammered it, and I know that you've talked to me a lot about it. But I'm just curious, in a quick synopsis, what does it look like working with a suffering family member of one of ours from what we've done, the illness that they now have? What does that look like?
Well, a lot of people don't see it and don't understand it. So I need to explain it to them. And I explain to them that that's why we do this work, because we get as sick as the alcoholic does. And we do a lot of damage to the alcoholic, just like the alcoholic does a lot of damage to us. And that's what I do. And then I just show them that the big book is for us. I change a few words. We change drinking to thinking, and we change alcoholic to Al-Anonic, and it fits us. Once you get past page 23, it fits us. It's like it's written for us too. Thanks, Jack. I love you too.
Incredible. Thank you.